Hello, I'm Dr. Linda Carney, and welcome to Ask the Doc. In this program, we're going to be reading through a series of questions that have been asked in many different public speaking engagements where I presented health topics. So the answers will be targeted to the specific question that the audience members wrote down and turned in. Here we go. Our first question is, how is food processed? And that's a great question because the food processing industry can change foods so much that they can turn what was once a healthy food into a not very healthy product for sale. How do they do that? Well, let's talk about light processing. The light processing removes the water. It concentrates the calories by dehydration. A good example of this is a raisin. And think of this. Grapes have about 400 calories per pound. Raisins have about 1,350 calories per pound. A lot more calories in a handful of raisins than in a handful of grapes because you can simply fit more raisins into your hand than you can grapes because of volume. So when we remove the water, it's simply a physical change. It's not a chemical change, but it does concentrate the calories. So that's the lightest processing of all. Then there's medium processing, modifying the fiber in such a way by grinding the whole grain or blending a vegetable in a blender or blending a fruit in a smoothie. The problem with medium processing is that when you break down the food into smaller particles, it rushes into the bloodstream from the small intestine much more quickly. We call this the rapid assimilation of nutrients. What happens is the nutrients rush in and up goes the blood sugar level rapidly. This calls forth insulin production from the body. What's wrong with insulin? Well, insulin is necessary to take care of that spiking sugar level, but insulin has two side effects. Makes you hungry, makes you store fat. And who needs those two side effects? And so when we rapidly absorb the nutrients because they've been broken down small, like flour from whole grains, or juicing, the rapid rise in sugar also can be inflammatory, calling forth inflammatory mediators from the body's cells. So for this reason, that type of modification of the fiber has been called medium processing, and it's not quite as healthy as the whole food in its natural state, just as it was grown. And then there's heavy processing, and this involves removing the fiber, such as what juicers do when you juice a fruit or a vegetable. It separates the fiber from the nutrients and makes the nutrients more simple and refined, like simple carbohydrates. The simplest carbohydrate of all is sugar or glucose or white table sugar, which is sucrose. So when you remove the fiber, you've got a much more rapid sugar spike. And this causes the pleasure center to ping with delight. We don't think of it as becoming intoxicated when the blood sugar level rises rapidly. We think of it as delicious when the pleasure center is activated. And that's heavy processing. But the food industry goes one step further because they're after your taste buds. If they can hijack your taste buds, your dollars will follow. And so what the food industry does is it removes or modifies fiber, and it removes or modifies water in the food, and it adds in 3 addicting ingredients that ping your pleasure center and make you think, delicious. Those 3 ingredients are sugar, salt, and fat. When they add animal protein, it's even more addicting. And so many times animal proteins or animal products are thrown into a food simply to boost its addictive potential. So there you have it, the 4 ways that foods can be processed. Light is removing the water, medium is modifying the fiber, heavy is removing the fiber completely, such as a juicer would do, and addicting food processing is adding in the sugar, salt, fat, and many times animal products to the food. Our next question involves why we like processed food so much. Why is it so hard to give it up? Processed foods stimulate the pleasure center immediately. The Brazilians have a saying, you can translate it, eat and cry for more. And I love that saying because it gives, in a very graphic way, the idea of being instantly hooked. And that's what foods that have added sugar, salt, and fat or animal products can do to our pleasure center. Out comes the stored neurotransmitters, dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, and they come rushing into the bloodstream, raising us to the unnatural high. And so we like processed food in a pleasure center sense, and yet logically we know that things that are high in sugar, salt, and fat aren't as good for us. So what should our goals be? Our goals for the best health should be a whole foods plant-based diet with no meat, dairy, eggs, or oil. We should strive to have less than 20% of our total calories be from fat. We should try to eat our foods as whole foods, as unprocessed as possible, meaning minimal loss of water, no modification of the fibers, no added sugars, fats, or salts. And if we're eating grains, and we should eat grains, that's a Starch-Smart way to eat. If we're eating grains, they should be whole grains. So, some have asked the question, can we trust all plants? Are all plants healthy for removing disease from our lives? The answer to that question is a complex one because everybody's at a different place and everybody's got different issues that they're facing. We've got all shapes and sizes of people with different genetics. Can plants be a good thing to base your diet on? Absolutely. You see, the meat industry has people convinced, some people convinced, that there is no protein apart from meat or animal products. But that's not true. Plants have plenty of protein, all you need, in fact. The dairy industry has created the myth that we need dairy products for the calcium to keep our bones strong. But that's not true. We don't need the calcium from dairy products to prevent osteoporosis, the brittle bone disease. And when you think of omega-3 fatty acids, you think of fish. And the fishing industry is only too happy to promote the myth that fish are the very best source of the omega-3 precursors. However, the fish got those omega-3s, the good fatty acids, by eating little green plants. You see, no fish or mammal can make omega-3. Only plants can make it. So, can we trust all plants? Some plants are very high in calorie density. This means that they're concentrated in calories. In fact, some of the most fattening foods on the planet can be vegan, completely plant-based with no animal products. And by this I mean oils, nuts, and seeds. They have more calories per pound than any other food on the planet. Flour, made from whole grains or made from refined grains, is also very concentrated in calories. Can we trust all plants? Well, some people need to practice portion control on the foods that are more concentrated in calories. There are some people who are not going to do as well if they're having dried fruits as opposed to whole fruits in their fresh or frozen state. There are some people who are not going to do as well eating a greater amount of nuts, seeds, avocado, those kinds of things. And most people are not going to do well eating oils because oils are a fat removed from its fiber. And I think of oils as a poison because of what they do to our circulation, hurting the endothelial cell and shrinking the arteries down narrow. So, to answer the question, can we trust all plants? I don't use oils, and I recommend that you completely eliminate plant-based oils from your diet. All vegetable oils, all fruit oils from coconut, if you think of it as a fruit or a nut, they need to go out of the diet. And then there are some things that are used from the plant-based world that have objectionable characteristics. In this, I think of cacao. Cacao is the plant from which we get chocolate. Cacao has theobromine and caffeine, and Dr. Robert Vogel, PhD, has shown that caffeine and theobromine can hurt the endothelial cell. This compromises our circulation. So I choose not to use cacao in my foods. It's kind of addicting. Everybody knows the addicting potential of chocolate. There is a food that's similar in taste, but not addicting at all, and that's from the locust bean tree, and it's called carob. And so if we substitute carob and acquire that taste, soon your hijacked taste buds will no longer yearn and pine for cacao or chocolate. Speaking of cacao, it's naturally very gritty. You need to add a lot of fat to it to give it a creamy mouthfeel and make chocolate. Most of that fat is saturated, which goes to your liver and makes it produce too much cholesterol. Cacao is also naturally very bitter, and to overcome this, a lot of sugar must be added to cacao to turn it into chocolate. So, one child in one of my seminars once asked this: if chocolate is so bad for us, why did God make it taste so good? I think that's an excellent question. I realize that this question delves into the metaphysical and religious, so pardon me those of you who would prefer that I not delve into that topic. However, I don't think God created chocolate. He did create the plants that have alkaloids in them, such as the coffee bean and the tea plant and cacao. I don't think he intended those plants should be consumed as food. Those bitter alkaloids are produced by the plant to prevent overgrazing by herd animals. And then again, can we trust all plants? Well, what about opium poppies? They have a function. They have substances that can be misused. What about the foxglove, from which we get digitalis, a medicine previously used in heart disease? So you can see that various plants have various compounds, and whole food plant-based diet, definitely good. But we need to take care and understand what plants should be avoided. Here's a question posed that really kind of stumped me. It said, my doctor said that plants can cause disease, such as eating a plant-based diet can cause Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I disagree completely. There are many causes of Hashimoto's thyroiditis whereby the immune system is overstimulated to make antibodies that destroy the thyroid. But eating a plant-based diet is not the cause of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Another question was, do plant-based diets cause celiac disease or gluten intolerance? Again, the answer is no. How about folate deficiency? Do plant-based diets cause folate deficiency? My answer is an unequivocal no. Let's talk about the B vitamin folate. Folate comes from green plants. The word folate comes from the word foliage. Folic acid is made by the supplement industry, and it's a very different thing than the folate. Folate comes in plants, folic acid comes in pills. Many people believe that if they're pregnant and they want to avoid neural tube defects such as spina bifida, that they need to take prenatal vitamins because of their high folic acid content. The unfortunate truth is the more folic acid that has been taken, the higher the risk of breast and prostate cancer. In fact, there are studies showing that people who had high folic acid supplements had 167 times greater risk of prostate cancer and breast cancer. I ask my patients who are pregnant not to take prenatal vitamins because high intake of folic acid has been clearly linked with various cancers. Our next question about disease caused by plants is pernicious anemia. What is pernicious anemia? Pernicious anemia is a deficiency of vitamin B12, also known as cyanocobalamin. Vitamin B12 can be sold over the counter as cyanocobalamin. It can also be sold as its active metabolites, methcobalamin or hydroxycobalamin, my favorite, which is the most active metabolite of vitamin B12. Pernicious anemia is a serious disease, and it's very important to supplement your diet by taking a vitamin B12 pill because we don't get vitamin B12 from plants. We don't get it from animals, we get it from bacteria. However, animals eat plenty of bacteria in their food, and thus they concentrate the vitamin B12 carried in by the bacteria with the food that the animal ate. So animal products have B12 levels in them that are measurable. However, among my patients, many times at the beginning of our relationship, they ask me to measure a vitamin B12 level, even if they're not at all plant-based. And so I find more vitamin B12 deficiency among my patients who are standard American diet eaters rather than among my vegan patients. Why is that? It's a complex question, and I believe that there are many factors that play in. Some people don't absorb vitamin B12 very well, and the World Health Organization recommends that everyone over age 50 take a vitamin B12 supplement daily. I myself take 1,000 micrograms of hydroxycobalamin daily. I think it's a healthy thing to do, especially because some people do not absorb it very well. They don't make enough extrinsic factor, which comes from the liver and helps us absorb our vitamin B12, or they don't make enough intrinsic factor. And these two factors can make them not absorb enough vitamin B12, especially as they age. Other people are taking acid-blocking medicines, and this impairs our ability to absorb vitamin B12 when there is a low acid, too low of an acid environment in the stomach. But I believe that many people who are eating the standard American diet are using factors in their beverages that make you urinate away your vitamin B12. One of those factors is alcohol. Alcohol needs to be excreted by the body because if you don't excrete that alcohol and metabolize it as you're getting ready to excrete it, it's going to alter the sensorium. In other words, the person could go unconscious. If you drink too much alcohol, you're going to get intoxicated and maybe fall down drunk. And so, if the body doesn't marshal its forces to metabolize that alcohol when we take it in and excrete it, bad things will happen. So the body is very good at metabolizing and excreting alcohol, usually, unless the liver is ill. When the body is excreting alcohol, this effect is like a diuretic effect. What does that mean? Diuresis means to make urine. Out with the urine goes the water-soluble vitamins, like vitamin B12. It's clearly known that people who are alcoholics often have a deficiency of vitamin B12 because the urination that is induced by all their alcohol intake washes the B12 out of their body. There are plenty of people who are using moderate amounts of alcohol and yet have levels of vitamin B12 that I would consider suboptimal or too low for good health. Another diuretic is caffeine. Caffeine causes us to produce urine because caffeine has a diuretic effect also, similar to what alcohol's diuretic effect is. Out with that extra urine goes the water-soluble vitamins, such as vitamin B12. People who are vegan and using caffeine have sometimes shown up as B12 deficient. And when they eliminate caffeine from their diet, many of them have raised their B12 level even if they didn't take the B12 supplement that I recommended. And I've seen this over and over in my practice. Now that doesn't make a scientific study, just what I've seen among my patients, but I've seen it enough that I believe the scientific studies that show it's easier to retain your vitamin B12 without alcohol and caffeine as part of your lifestyle. I frequently get asked questions about vitamin D. Vitamin D is an important hormone, often thought of as a vitamin, but actually a hormone, and our skin makes it when we're exposed to sunlight. Sunlight is a very important factor for good health. Too much, not a good thing. Too much sunlight, not a good thing. Too much vitamin D, not a good thing if you're taking it in supplement form. It is possible to get toxic on vitamin D, but that usually doesn't happen from exposure to sunlight, but rather from exposure to pills. When we take in vitamin D, we need to remember that it's a fat-soluble vitamin. The 4 fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K, so they can build up to too toxic a level if you're taking in too much, especially in pharmaceutical form, rather than getting your vitamin D naturally from the sun. It's been said that people who have a vitamin D level, a total vitamin D level, less than 40, are at risk for cancers, osteoporosis, diabetes, and depression, to name a few of the diseases that have been linked with a low vitamin D level. I have seen that people who eat a plant-based diet are often not above a level of 40, but I believe that the science shows that they're okay if their level is above 20. Do I take a vitamin D supplement? I do. I take a vitamin D supplement of vitamin D2, which is not obtained from the skin of sheep, but I make sure that it's a vegan source and in a tablet rather than a capsule, which could be contaminated with fish oil or gelatin. And so I believe that vitamin D is an important thing to remember, but sunlight is far more important than pills. I have great respect for Dr. John McDougall, and he says don't take any supplements except for vitamin B12. My stance is very similar, except that I do recommend the addition of vitamin D to the diet, especially in people who have indoor jobs and don't get a lot of sun exposure during the day because they're living under roofs at home and working under roofs and driving under roofs, and they just don't have the amount of sunlight that people in different climates could get. Our next question is, do cholesterol levels ever go too low? That's a great question, and I believe that if you're getting in sufficient calories, which is very important to focus on if you're eating a plant-based diet, if you're getting in sufficient calories, there's no such thing as too low of a cholesterol level as long as you're not starving to death. What about the people whose doctors tell them that their cholesterol level is too low? Most people in the United States of America are not starving to death, although some people have diseases like anorexia nervosa, and they are taking in too few calories, and their cholesterol level could reflect that. There are other people who have a genetic strike against them, and it's just very difficult for them to get their cholesterol levels low, even if they're taking in inadequate calories. But by and large, too low of cholesterol levels are not a problem for people taking in adequate calories. There are some physicians who tell people that they need to raise their cholesterol levels, but I disagree. If we're getting in adequate calories, the lower the cholesterol, the more protective that is for the heart. From where do I get that opinion? I get it from the Framingham Heart Study. The Framingham Heart Study is the longest running heart study in the history of our country, and if we look at the results of the Framingham Heart Study, ideal levels of total cholesterol are below 150. Ideal levels of LDL cholesterol are below 80. There are some exceptions to people who should eat a little bit more fat to keep their cholesterol levels up, and these exceptions are found in people with fat malabsorption syndrome. Can we eat enough nuts, avocado, olives, and other healthy fats to raise cholesterol? Some patients ask me. Yes, if you're eating nuts, avocados, olives, and other plant-based fats, that can often raise cholesterol. And if you're eating too many nuts, avocados, olives, other plant-based fats, you can raise your cholesterol too high. Remember that saturated fat taken into the diet raises cholesterol the most. What are the ideal cholesterol levels? Ideal cholesterol levels are learned from the Framingham Heart Study. Dr. William Castelli, MD, the father of the Framingham Heart Study, tells us that total cholesterol levels are ideal when they're 150 or less. A total cholesterol of 150 or less makes it really, really rare for anyone to be seen with a stroke or heart attack, according to the Framingham Heart Study. And LDL cholesterol levels of less than 80 occurs in people who simply don't have strokes and heart attacks, according to the data gleaned from the Framingham Heart Study. What about triglycerides? The normal level is less than 150 for triglycerides, but the ideal level is less than 100. If you've got a triglyceride level less than 100, that makes it more likely that the LDL cholesterol that you do have is less likely to be the small, hard, dense, artery-plugging kind of LDL cholesterol. What about HDL cholesterol levels? Is it true that the higher the HDL, the better? I don't think so. I believe that in recent years, the science has come out to show us that HDL cholesterol levels can be manipulated by certain substances, such as niacin or alcohol in the diet. But these high HDL levels have not been shown to be cardioprotective. In other words, people can still have strokes and heart attacks even with artificially raised high levels of HDL cholesterol. But some people have naturally high levels of HDL cholesterol. The HDL cholesterol level doesn't matter as much as we were previously led to believe. When we find that HDL cholesterol levels are not cardioprotective, and more instructive is the LDL cholesterol level for predicting risk for heart disease and stroke, we realize that it's okay to have HDL cholesterol levels that are below what the lab shows as the bell-shaped curve of normal. In other words, having a low HDL cholesterol is not a problem if your LDL cholesterol is below 80. In fact, it's akin to thinking of it like this. You need less cops on the beat when there's less criminals on the street. The LDL cholesterol can be thought of as the criminals, and the HDL cholesterol can be thought of as the cops. HDL cholesterol is like a pickup truck. It carries out the LDL cholesterol and excretes it in the waste of the body. And so it's a street sweeper cleaning out the arteries. The LDL cholesterol is like a criminal in that it plugs up the arteries and causes damage. And so HDL cholesterol is a good thing, but if yours is low in response to a total cholesterol that's under 150 and in response to an LDL level that's below 80, I wouldn't worry about it as long as you're getting adequate calories. One question that's often posed is this: what about the healthy fats? Healthy fats are whole food plant-based fats, and omega-3 is the most important essential fatty acid. The essential fatty acids can be thought of as non-inflammatory and not shrinking the artery narrow in a process called vasoconstriction, but rather actually dilating arteries. So omega-3 is an important fat to obtain. The nuts and seeds that are highest in omega-3 are walnuts, flaxseed, and chia seeds. Does that mean you should be throwing these fats into your food to make sure you get enough omega-3? No. There are some people who desperately need to gain weight. If they need to gain weight and they would like to add in some walnuts, flax, and chia seeds, it may not hurt them at all if all their other biomarkers are normal. And when I make salad dressings, my favorite way to make them are with a tablespoon of flaxseed and a tablespoon of walnuts in the blender. And yes, that is modifying the fiber, but it makes a creamy dressing with some of the healthiest fats. And this small amount of water, a little bit of lemon juice, some seasonings like onion powder, garlic powder, dill, sage, these combinations of foods can last about 3 days. So 1 tablespoon of flaxseed and 1 whole flaxseed and 1 tablespoon of raw walnuts is spread over 3 days. And this seems to be a pretty good combination for most people who are trying to lose weight or lower cholesterol. When we think about healthy fats, the question is, what about calorie restriction? Hasn't calorie restriction been shown to increase longevity? And the answer is yes. There are studies that have shown that when a laboratory animal has the calories restricted 10%, 10% less than the animal would choose to eat if it could eat to its fill, that animal has less disease and lives longer. The experiment was repeated with a 20% calorie restriction, and there was less disease still and a longer life. 30%, 40%, 50%, up to 60% calorie restriction, and the animal lived the longest with the least disease. But after restricting calories more than 60%, then the animal began to die of starvation. This study was repeated with many different types of laboratory animals, and the study results were consistent no matter what species of animal were studied. So calorie restriction can be a very good strategy for health. However, it's important to eat for satiety and satisfaction because the hunger drive is the strongest drive in the human body. We need to eat until we're satisfied because if you're feeling deprived all the time, the potato chips are more likely to call your name, and those are high-fat foods, which, by the way, can be vegan, but they're still too high in fat. The poisoning from foods comes from high-fat foods and animal proteins in the diet. When we think about healthy fats, we want to think about whole food fat versus fats from which the fiber has been removed, such as olive oil. Olive oil, as found in the olive and not processed into an oil, can be a beneficial thing in small amounts. However, olive oil removed from its fiber has been stripped of many of its vitamins, its fiber, its health-giving qualities, and oils, even if they're made from plants, damage endothelial cells. Remember that olive oil shrinks down the blood flow, narrowing the artery 31%, restricting blood flow for 4 hours. And it's completely vegan. Remember that the oils have the most calories per pound. The oils have 4,000 calories per pound, compared to fruits, which have often less than 400 calories per pound. Our next question is about picky eaters, and who hasn't met a picky eater? Picky eaters are everywhere, and I understand why. The food industry, adding in the sugar, salt, fat, and animal protein, has hijacked our taste buds in the name of profit. When our taste buds are hijacked, vegetables don't taste as good. They may taste bland or bitter. When our taste buds have been hijacked, we prefer the taste of cheese, not the taste of brown rice. You understand what I'm saying? When our taste buds have been hijacked by what I call hyperpalatable additives like sugar, hyperpalatable tastes like intense sweetness, we come to prefer that level of sweetness. But the good news for picky eaters is that taste buds can be restrained. Taste buds can also be retrained. When taste buds are retrained, it takes some time, 3 to 4 weeks usually, but taste buds can learn to like, as its preference, a lower level of sweetness. Instead of needing an intense sweetness, fruits begin to taste sweeter in their whole natural state, whether frozen or fresh. Once you've gotten all the table sugar and other intense refined sweeteners out of the diet. To retrain your taste buds, try taking the sugar, salt, and fat out of your foods by avoiding foods that the food industry has processed highly, such as crackers and chips. Your taste buds can be retrained. Sure, you may go through some withdrawals at first, and yet if you eat for satiety, what I call eating Starch-Smart, and you have plenty of intact whole grains and starchy root vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, these things can help you to fight against feelings of deprivation, feelings of hunger, while your taste buds are getting retrained, and you can learn to love your food. Take it from me, because I grew up hating beans and vegetables, and now I eat them preferentially for breakfast because they cut my food cravings all day and keep me from giving in to temptations. What about transition diets? Transition diets are diets that have been used to help people overcome chicken fried steak and macaroni and cheese and other highly addictive foods with animal products in them. Make no mistake about it, the taste of chicken, the taste of meat, the taste of eggs is highly addicting. Cheese is one of the most addicting substances on the planet. I put it right up there with heroin and cocaine. Cheese is a very difficult addiction to give up. It hits your pleasure center and addicts you. The casein, the principal protein found in milk, is concentrated in cheese because the water has been removed from the milk product, pushing the proteins together. That concentrated protein hits the pleasure center, making cheese addicting, and the more dry the cheese is, the more the water's been removed from the milk, the more addicting the cheese is, and the more damaging to health. What's the hardest, driest cheese of all? Parmesan. And so, if you took 10 units of milk and removed the water to make 1 unit of cheese, you can see how concentrated things are. So transition diets are a little bit higher in sugar, salt, and fat in the attempt to help people go through the withdrawals, the cravings that are often experienced when we give up meat, dairy, eggs, and oils. So using a little bit more nuts than you ordinarily would use as your end goal is often used when people are on transition diets. The food is a little bit richer than our end goal. But life is a process, and the good news is the more you clear the fat out of your diet, the more satisfied you can be with your food. A therapeutic diet, on the other hand, can be thought of as the opposite end of the spectrum. There are some people who've been newly diagnosed with cancer or heart disease. They've just suffered a stroke. They may have new onset diabetes. You get the picture. And those people are desperate to save their life, extend their life, improve their quality of life, and do it with less medication. For those people, especially those with willpower, they choose a therapeutic diet. Not everyone needs a therapeutic diet, but I've chosen to follow one because I want to have the lowest risk of disease in my life. Therapeutic diets are lower in fat and they are completely devoid of animal products. A therapeutic diet eats foods as whole and unprocessed as possible, but a therapeutic diet isn't all raw. Cooked foods are important for satiety and for nutrition. There are some vegetables that have a greater ability to release their nutrients bioavailable to our body if they're cooked, such as zucchini. Try steaming your zucchini without cutting it. Don't even cut the ends off first, and you'll retain more nutrients. Cut it after it's steamed. What about fake meats and cheeses? These products have often been used to help picky eaters give up real meats and cheeses. But fake meats and cheeses are often made with isolated soy proteins that I don't think are healthy. They're often very high in fat and salt, and I think that if we can avoid fake meats and cheeses, we'll do better. Some people have nicknamed them the image to the beast, and I think it's an apt description to help you realize that that's not really the goal. What we want is plants, not fake meats and cheeses. There are some people who would like to adopt a plant-based diet, but they're desperate not to lose weight. Perhaps they're teenage guys who want to bodybuild. They are afraid that if they adopt a plant-based diet, they'll lose too much weight. And I understand why they fear this. Many people who have adopted a plant-based diet for the first time don't have a repertoire of recipes, and so they're simply calorie restricting. They've simply cut out the meat, dairy, eggs, and oil, but they haven't added in the complex carbohydrates that they need for satiety. The barley, the whole wheat pasta, the brown rice or quinoa or millet. Those kinds of foods are very important for satiety, and it's important to consider calorie density. Remember that brown rice has about 500 calories per pound, and brown rice flour has about 1,450 calories per pound. So if you're desperate not to lose weight, you can tolerate foods made from flour a lot more than a person who has a lot of weight to lose. You can tolerate more avocado, nuts, and seeds than a person who's desperate to lose weight. If you are trying not to lose weight, you can tolerate more dried fruits. But the important thing is to eat breakfast like a king. Now, some people are so slender that they need to eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a king, and supper like a king. And it's important to get enough calories and not put yourself into deprivation mode. Carry food with you, because being caught short without healthy plant-based food is a recipe for disaster. Because if it's been 6 hours since your last meal and a Krispy Kreme donut, which can be vegan by the way, comes within your orbit, you may succumb to that temptation. I know what that temptation is like because I previously never met a Krispy Kreme that I didn't like, but I'm grateful to have been able to overcome my addiction to donuts and other high-fat foods by focusing on whole foods that are rich in nutrients and making sure that I carried food with me wherever I went so that when mealtime came, I wasn't dependent on a restaurant, which may not have any food that's low enough in fat. Breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, supper like a pauper, that's the best way to lose weight. But if you're desperate not to lose weight, then you're going to need a heavier supper and make sure that you're taking in adequate calories. I ask people to eat Starch-Smart because when you're taking in starchy vegetables, starchy whole grains, you're getting in adequate calories, and these are the types of calories that have fueled the world's civilizations. If you look at a map of the world, you see people, whole populations raised on corn and beans, rice and vegetables. And these kinds of complex carbohydrates are the underpinnings of what have made civilizations great. Think of millet in China, and buckwheat in Russia, and corn in Mexico. Another question we often hear is honey bad for us? Well, you know that raw, unpasteurized honey should never be given to infants under the age of 1 year. The brachial artery tourniquet test, however, was done in adults, and the brachial artery tourniquet test showed that honey was one of those substances which, when fed to the test subjects, narrowed their arteries down. Honey is concentrated sweetener, and so for some people in moderation, honey can be okay. However, it depends what your blood pressure is. It depends how much weight you need to lose. So be careful with honey. Be moderate with it. Usually I say moderation kills, but there are some foods, such as honey, that you can be moderate with. Remember that there are some ethical vegans who won't use any products made from animals, and so they feel that honey does not belong in a vegan diet. But since my focus is health, even though I do love the animals and the environment, I do use a little honey, and the reason that I do is because honey can be a much better substitute than white table sugar. Is honey bad for us? It tends to hit the pleasure center. It's delicious. That's what we term the intoxicating power of foods that hit the pleasure center. And when the pleasure center is stimulated, we may eat more of a food than we otherwise would. So intense sweeteners like maple syrup, agave, and honey can stimulate more appetite. In this regard, it's not so good for people who are trying to lose weight. Honey is a little bit more calorie dense than other forms of simple carbohydrate like fruit. And so if you have honey, it may be a little bit harder for you to reach your health goals than if you eat your sweetener in the form of fresh whole fruit or frozen fruit. Another question that is often posed to us is inflammation. Inflammation can be caused by poor adrenal gland function, and when this happens, people feel that they feel a sense of fatigue and pain, and they wonder what factors in my life may be contributing to that sensation of pain and fatigue. Using caffeine in our lifestyle can deplete us of our chemicals adrenaline and noradrenaline. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are manufactured in the adrenal medulla. That's the inner portion of the adrenal gland, and they're stored in the synaptic boutons. Bouton is a French word meaning button, and the endings of the nerve ending are there waiting at the end of the nerve, and between them and the next nerve is a gulf or a canyon or a chasm. It's called the synaptic cleft. When caffeine is introduced into the body, the synaptic boutons open, and out comes the adrenaline in a burst, giving us a temporary feeling of alertness or energy. But that energy has come at a price because we fritter away our adrenaline and then we don't have as much energy the next day. Some people don't realize that today's fatigue might have been caused by yesterday's caffeine. And then there's television, which isn't a food at all. How does television affect adrenal gland function and adrenaline levels? How does television affect energy levels? Television can produce feelings in us that the body has a hard time deciphering in the mind what is artificial from the television, a situation that we're not really in, and what we're actually in. If a fight is going on in television, the adrenaline can be poured into our bloodstream from various parts of the body as if we were in the fight ourselves. This can tend to deplete us and fatigue us over time. Many people ask questions about old injuries, stating that because of their old injuries, there's no way that plants could affect their level of pain. But a plant-based diet can help to heal old injuries, even if not completely. It's possible to get a level of pain control by eating a plant-based diet from whole, unprocessed foods that is simply not possible eating the standard American diet with meat, dairy, eggs, and oil, especially when the fat content is high. So how do plant-based foods help heal old injuries and suppress pain from other old injuries that are still there but no longer hurting? Plant-based foods increase blood flow by nourishing the endothelial cells. It's the leafy green vegetables that nourish the endothelial cells the most. The endothelial cells dilate the arteries to their maximum youthful openness. When those arteries are dilated, those arteries bring healing blood flow to decrease inflammation, carry away cellular waste, and combat oxidative stress, the aging process of the body. Blood flow containing antioxidants, which come only from plants, can help old injuries to repair somewhat and suppress pain even if the injury is still there. What about old injuries and our level of adipose tissue? Adipose tissue is fat worn on our body. And remember that Dr. McDougall says the fat that we eat is the fat that we wear. Each fat cell in our body can be thought of as a little factory for inflammation. And the more you feed those fat cells, the more inflammatory mediators will be dumped from the fat cells into your bloodstream, making old injuries hurt and be stiff a lot more than they would if you ate a low-fat, plant-based diet that nourished your endothelial cells and shrunk the body fat away. An anti-inflammatory diet is a diet low in fat, devoid of oil, and completely lacking in animal protein. The standard American diet with its meat, dairy, eggs, and oil has shown to increase levels of inflammatory mediators in many scientific studies. But there are 8 factors that can really help people who have old injuries feel a lot better. Those 8 factors are fresh air, exercise, water, rest, abstinence from harmful substances, and a plant-based diet. Sunshine and trust, our state of mind, because a mind that is troubled and lacking in trust can be hard on the immune system, and that can greatly affect health. We all know that there's a powerful connection between mind and body. So let's take each one of these and see how they relate to old injuries. Fresh air. If we get 15 minutes of fresh air daily, the positive ions in the fresh air and the negative ions in the fresh air interact in such a way that we have much better healing and blood flow. Exercise. It's been very clearly shown that when we exercise, we produce endorphins and we suppress our levels of pain. Water. Muscles are made largely of water, and when muscles have adequate water, we hurt less. I ask adults in my practice to drink 64 ounces of water daily so that their muscles will hurt the least, their joints will be well lubricated, and old injuries won't bother them as much. Many of my patients say that this factor alone, drinking extra water, has cut their pain levels significantly. Rest. It's very important to get 2 hours of sleep before midnight, and when we do, we have far less aches and pains. Treating sleep apnea is also very important to cutting our level of pain. Getting adequate rest on a daily basis and on a weekly basis has been shown by scientific studies to improve health and cut the amount of inflammatory pain that old injuries and new injuries can cause. Abstinence from harmful substances. It has been shown that caffeine shrinks blood flow 40% within 20 minutes. When the blood flow is constricted, there's less antioxidants being delivered to help that joint cool down its level of inflammation and oxidative stress. So that joint or muscle is aging more rapidly. When we use caffeine, we also dehydrate ourselves because of its diuretic effect. This means that fascia can kink up. Fascia is the covering of all muscles, the muscle as a whole, and each individual muscle cell. And when fascia is not stretched out because it's been kinked up with dehydration, that fascia can cause hurting and pain. Diet. A low-fat plant-based diet has been shown to help heal old injuries and reduce the level of pain. At the Engine 2 immersion, in which former firefighter Rip Esselstyn takes employees of Whole Foods Market to a beautiful camp resort setting and feeds them a diet of whole, unprocessed, plant-based foods low in fat, without oils, without animal proteins, these people often experience remarkable resolution of carpal tunnel syndrome and knee pain and back pain. By the end of the week with Rip Esselstyn, many people at the Engine 2 immersion feel so much better, and even if they have old injuries or inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, there's much less stiffness and pain. Sunshine. Sunshine is an important part of healing old injuries and reducing pain. It's also an important part of combating depression and anxiety, because when we have depression or anxiety, pain is intensified and experienced on a more intense level. Sunshine is a wonderful factor for reducing pain through many different mechanisms. Trust. When we have a trusting repose in our spirit, we are much less likely to experience pain. And that's how the 8 natural remedies can help reduce the level of pain and heal old injuries. One question that has been very frustrating for many people who have adopted a plant-based diet is the level of cholesterol that remains high despite a vegan diet for some people. Every one of us has genetic factors that play into our level of total cholesterol. What can a person who's on a vegan diet do to make sure that their cholesterol levels come down? The vegan diet needs to be very low in fat and free from oils to have the best cholesterol lowering effect. There are other factors besides getting the saturated fat out of a completely plant-based diet when it's in the form of added fats like earth balance, margarine, and other margarines made from oils. We need to get those completely out because they poison the body with a circulation impairment. But there are other factors such as sleep that has an effect on cholesterol. Many of my patients have adopted a bedtime prior to 10 p.m. and when they consistently get to bed at 9:30 so that they're asleep by 10 p.m., I've seen cholesterol lower 30 points just by that change alone in people who were already on a low-fat, plant-based diet of whole unprocessed foods. There's another factor for cholesterol, and that's fructose, which is fruit sugar. When people are eating more fruit than their body can handle, they may raise cholesterol simply because they've been eating too much fruit, especially in its dried form, like raisins or dried apricots. So if cholesterol is a problem for you, you may need to cut out dried fruits to achieve your ideal level. That's what it took for me. Exercise is a very key part of lowering cholesterol, and we need to exercise daily for best cholesterol lowering results. Caffeine can also raise levels of cholesterol, and when we cut caffeine out, I've seen cholesterol levels lower by 30%. We need to regard the calorie density or calorie concentration of foods. Foods that are more dense in calories, such as nuts, seeds, and avocado, can raise your level of total cholesterol. And it depends on what your genetics are, your weight, how close you are to your ideal body weight, what you're sleeping like, many different factors as to how much percentage of your calories from nuts and seeds you can tolerate and still have a normal level of total cholesterol under 150. I've often been asked, why, Dr. Carney, do you say not to eat coconut? Some people say, well, how about shredded coconut or coconut milk? They're okay, right? I understand why you're against oil. It clearly hurts the endothelial cell and shrinks circulation within 20 minutes. However, shredded coconut may have sugar added to it. Often these additives are put in by the food industry. And coconut milk or shredded coconut has so much fat that many people are simply not going to reach their weight loss goals or their cholesterol lowering goals or their blood pressure goals if they're adding coconut into their food. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn Jr., MD, says in his rules in the book Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, if you don't ever want to have heart disease, it's important to avoid all coconut products. This is what I do, except for using coconut oil on my skin, but I don't put it in my body. The reason is coconut has more saturated fat than lard. Saturated fat tends to raise cholesterol. I'm one of those people who has to fight to keep her total cholesterol levels normal. In 2004, the food industry learned that the public became wise to the idea of trans fats. Trans fats are very harmful, playing a role in circulatory diseases like stroke and heart attack, raising cholesterol levels, and becoming a factor in cancer production. So trans fats were mandated to be taken out of the baked goods. They were often found in biscuits, cookies, chips, crackers. Oh no, said the food industry, what are we going to do? We need something to put into the foods to give them a stable shelf life, like the trans fats did. Because you see, even the bacteria can't break down the trans fats, so things wouldn't spoil as much, and that gave them a stable shelf life. Oh no, said the food industry, what are we going to use to give that creamy mouthfeel, to hit the pleasure center with a high-fat load to the pleasure center, making all the neurotransmitters go ping in a delicious mouthfeel? What are we going to use now that we can't use trans fats? So enter coconut oil, which we've had for 100 years, but coconut oil never enjoyed the popularity that it did until 2004, when a spin campaign was undertaken by the food industry to help people think that coconut was really healthy for them. And so all these myths about coconut preventing Alzheimer's and being so good for health have been propagated to boost the sales of coconut oil, and boost those sales those myths have. It's very unfortunate that people think that coconut oil is so healthy when it's really not. It's not healthy unless you're putting it on the outside of your skin or on your hair, and then it's great. One question often asked to me about people who are Seventh-day Adventist is, was it safer in the 1800s to eat dairy? I believe that in the 1800s, dairy didn't have the amount of pesticides, hormones, and antibiotics that are now placed in the feed of cattle, and we didn't also have the problem that we know about now of prions. What are prions? Prions are an infective agent that are implicated in bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as mad cow disease. Mad cow disease can be transmitted in a sense through prions to humans, in which it looks like Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease, which has many of the same features as Alzheimer's disease. Prions are not technically alive. They're just proteins. It's really hard to denature them with high temperatures. Even temperatures as high as 800 degrees have been used to try and destroy the infective properties of prions, and yet they have still survived and been shown to be infective. Formaldehyde can't seem to kill it, bleach can't seem to kill it, freezing doesn't kill it, boiling doesn't kill it, and so prions can lie dormant in a system for decades and give symptoms very similar to Alzheimer's decades later. And so I believe that because of the prions that are now in the world's supply of domesticated beef, lamb, it's many animals have been diagnosed with prions. And it's very important to avoid animal products in our food. And so I believe that the dairy that is eaten today is no longer as safe as it may have been in limited quantities in the 1800s. Another question I'm often asked is, don't children need oil? Doesn't oil aid in the development of the brains of children? Well, I would caution you not to feed your children oil, but children do need a higher percentage of fat, especially in the first year of life. Human breast milk has a much higher percentage of fat than you would believe. In fact, the protein content of human breast milk is only 5% of the calories from protein. Most of the calories in human breast milk come from carbohydrate and fat. So children do need a higher amount of fat in their diet, especially in the first year of life. But children don't need to get that fat as oil removed from its fiber. The age of the child should dictate what percentage of their calories come from fat. Not that you need to count calories and get your calculator out, but it depends on the genetics of the child. We have children who come from families where obesity is a problem. If the child is already overweight in toddlerhood and in preschool years, it's important to practice the principle of calorie concentration and avoid those foods higher in calorie concentration. Some children cannot handle as many nuts as other children because some children are much more prone to put on weight. We have an obesity epidemic for our children, and it's very important to realize that no child needs oil in their diet. One question that is posed to me is, how can a plant-based diet help me cure acne? Well, I am happy to let you know that a plant-based diet has very good properties of skin clearing when the plant-based diet is free of oils and low in fat. It has happened for teenager after teenager after teenager in my practice that skin improves when meat, dairy, eggs, and oil are taken out of the diet. There is an adult form of acne called rosacea, and this has significantly been shown to be helped by a diet without alcohol, caffeine, meat, dairy, eggs, and oil. One question that we often get is about sinus problems, phlegm, and allergies. A low-fat plant-based diet of whole unprocessed foods without oil has been shown to cut the risk for phlegm-related, mucus-related diseases. Routinely, my patients come and tell me that they need far less of their allergy medication after they've cut out the meat, dairy, eggs, and oil from their diet. Doctor, they ask, should I eat only organic? I have a few factors to discuss about organic foods. Organic foods tend to taste better because pesticides don't taste that great, as you can imagine, and foods that have struggled to maintain their integrity without the benefit of pesticides to ward off the bugs are foods that tend to have a higher amount of antioxidants, which give foods color, and they tend to taste better, although this is not always the case in every single organic vegetable that you can buy. But in general, organic foods taste better. But what about the cost, you say? I can't afford it. My answer to this is buy the best plants that you can afford. If you can't afford organic, I understand. I can't always afford organic. However, if you can afford it, go for organic. It's just much more healthy. The health benefits of organic food have been shown to be good, but the health benefits of a diet of whole, unprocessed, plant-based foods without meat, dairy, eggs, and oil have been shown to be even better than standard American diet, eating only standard American diet with organic meats and organic vegetables. So you heard that right. Eating a plant-based diet, even if you can't afford organic vegetables, is better than eating only organics, but including meat, dairy, eggs, and oil. But doctor, they say, beans give me gas. And I do understand. What can we do to cut the level of gas? There are several things that you need to understand about colon bacteria, which are the largest source of gas. Colon bacteria can be acid-loving or alkaline-loving. Animal proteins have a high amount of sulfur in their amino acids, and this causes an acidic environment. The alkaline-loving bacteria are the ones that know how to digest the plants without giving you so much gas. But if there's undigested food, such as from overeating or from eating a bunch of plants when you're first starting out and you don't have the right bacteria in your colon, you may get more gas. However, after eating plants exclusively for 30 days, the colon bacteria can be changed over to the alkaline-loving kind. One bite of animal protein in a month can be a drop of acid that washes through the colon and kills off the good alkaline-loving bacteria, leaving you only with acid-loving bacteria. That means the next time you eat high-fiber plants, you may experience more gas. So one of the most miserable things can be to be vegan one day and omnivore the next, because you're going to get more gas if that's the practice that you follow. Try getting all the animal proteins completely out of your diet in every way that you can for 30 days. and you'll have less gas from that factor. There are good probiotics from a vegan source from a company that makes a product called Endimune. This was developed by a gastroenterologist in San Antonio, and Endimune has 3 times more probiotics than many others on the market. It's a completely vegan capsule. It doesn't have to be refrigerated, and it can be taken on an empty stomach or a full stomach. Endimune is a product worth looking into if you're just transitioning to a plant-based diet, because taking one Endimune capsule daily can help you to have happier bowels until you've been completely transitioned over for at least 30 days. There are products that you can take at the beginning of each meal that will reduce the chances of elaborating gas, making gas from the high-fiber, indigestible parts of the food. That product is called Say Yes to Beans, and Say Yes to Beans can be a great help to people because it cuts the production of gas if you take the Say Yes to Beans capsule at the beginning of each meal, but you won't need it forever. There are other things that you can do that are much more natural than taking pills, and that is to drink water an hour prior to breakfast. If you drink 2 big glasses of water an hour prior to breakfast, you'll moisten the intestinal contents, moving them downstream and helping your gas to be packaged into discrete little packages so that when you need it, which is when you're in the bathroom eliminating solid waste, you'll have the gas that you need to be rapid about it. However, you don't want that gas dribbling out every 15 minutes, and so that's why if you can eat 3 meals a day instead of grazing or snacking, you're going to have less gas. If you can drink your water in between your meals, that's been shown to reduce gas, as opposed to drinking your water or liquids at the time of the meal. You're going to have less gas if you avoid mixing fruits and vegetables in the same meal, especially leafy greens mixed with melons. Leafy greens mixed with melons seems to be the most gas producing for most people. If you eat the fruits at one meal, such as let's say eating them at the evening meal with whole grains like whole oat groats, you'll have less gas because the other 2 meals can be finished off with a more sweeter vegetable like a yam or a sweet potato or a little cherry tomato, which have a sweet taste but aren't going to give you as much gas as if you finished off the meal with a bite of fruit. Not everyone needs to do that. However, people who have low energy levels find that they have more energy if they don't mix their fruits and vegetables. And people who have problems with gas find that separating the fruits and the vegetables into 2 different meals can help them to have less gas. If an adult drinks 64 ounces of water before 5 p.m., that has been shown to give them less gas, especially if that water is drunk between the meals instead of with the meals. One question I often get is, Doctor, why do you eat leafy green vegetables at breakfast? Leafy green vegetables are not the only thing that I eat for breakfast. The Starch-Smart program advocates that you eat from these 4 categories of food at breakfast: beans, greens, squash, and yams. Once you've eaten those, if you're still hungry, add in intact whole grains for satiety, bulk, and staying power. Lots of energy in those whole grains. But the leafy greens are included at breakfast because they've got such power to help your circulation to dilate. If you want your blood pressure the lowest, eat those leafy greens at breakfast. If you want the best cancer-fighting power, eat those leafy greens at breakfast. If you want the most energy, eat those leafy greens at breakfast. Are you worried about protein deficiency? There is no protein deficiency if you're getting enough calories. A plant-based diet will supply all the protein that you need. Leafy greens have a high percentage of their calories from protein. Spinach is 51% of calories from protein. Doctor, what's wrong with vinegar? Vinegar is a fermentation product, and fermentation products have been shown to swell the airway, making mucus, phlegm, congestion, and sleep apnea more likely. One question that we often hear is, what about soy and estrogen? Will eating soy turn a boy into a girl? Eating soy will not turn a boy into a girl, not even figuratively. Soy has plant estrogens in it, and those plant estrogens act as a decoy. They cover the estrogen receptor on the cell so that real estrogen made by our body cannot bind and act as a growth stimulant, because too much growth out of control can be cancer. Soy in its unprocessed form has been shown to be cancer protective. And so when you eat soy, you can picture it as if it's a little airplane piloted by a private pilot. And the little airplane has snuck in and taken over the runway so that the big jet liner called estrogen cannot land on the runway until the little airplane gets out. The little airplane is represented by the soy estrogen, and the big jetliner is represented by the regular estrogen. And the reason we would like to not have an excess of estrogen in our bodies is because estrogen is like fertilizer to cell growth, and too much cell growth out of control is cancer. When you eat soy in an unprocessed form, it's much healthier for you. How processed is too processed? Well, soy milk can be okay in limited amounts as part of a recipe, but I tend not to use soy milk as a beverage in a glass, except for people who are desperate not to lose weight, because soy is high in fat. Tofu is mildly processed, and light tofu is better than regular tofu for people who are trying to lose weight or lower their cholesterol. I advise you not to eat highly processed soy products like soy burgers or patties. I advise you not to use protein supplements or powders from isolated soy protein because I feel that these can be harmful to health. Soy curls are a product made from a mildly processed non-GMO soybean, and soy curls are approved in the Starch-Smart system. What about the environment? Can a plant-based diet really make a difference for saving our rainforests or stopping air pollution? The destruction of the rainforest has been caused by grazing animals needing more land, and as the rainforest gets cut down to raise beef in South America for hungry North Americans, we have seen an unprecedented destruction of the rainforest to support the eating of animals and the food industry. Switching to a low-fat plant-based diet can help save the rainforest and protect us from worsening air pollution as trees are lost to pasture land. If you started eating a plant-based diet tomorrow, you could cut air pollution more than if you took off every airplane, train, or roadway vehicle off the planet at once, because eating a plant-based diet will cut greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel air pollution much more than what type of car you drive or what method of transportation you use. Water pollution is a serious issue on our planet, and the food industry is the largest unregulated polluter of our waterways on the planet. You see, animal excrement is produced in vast quantities, many times more than the human amount of excrement, and these waste products run off into our rivers, flow into our oceans, and cause great destruction of waterways life. The water consumption is much more extensive when you eat a meat-based diet. You see, it takes 66 gallons of water to produce 2.2 pounds of wheat, but it takes more than 6,600 gallons of water to produce 2.2 pounds of meat. Eating a plant-based diet will help you to save the environment's water, air, trees, yes, and the rainforest too. What about help for osteoporosis? The help that we need for osteoporosis is found in avoiding the 5 factors that cause us to urinate away our calcium. Those 5 factors are nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, salt, and animal protein in our food. Animal protein is made up more commonly of amino acids that contain a high frequency of the atom sulfur. This sulfur causes a lot of sulfuric acid that must be washed out of the body by the kidneys. The kidneys buffer that acid by leaching calcium out of the teeth and bones, and there goes that calcium down the toilet, leading to osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is not caused by a deficiency of calcium intake. Osteoporosis is caused by an excess of calcium outgo. You see, when you take calcium pills, those calcium molecules won't get into your bones and teeth and strengthening them. No, they'll just harden your arteries. And so taking calcium pills isn't going to help you with the problem of osteoporosis, unless you have a very specific rare condition of your parathyroid and you simply cannot conserve enough calcium. But most people are not in the condition of having parathyroid disease. Most people do not need to take calcium supplements. A nutrient-dense diet? What's that? Nutrient density is a wonderful concept that pictures how many nutrients are in the food compared with how many calories are in the food. And green leafy vegetables have the most nutrients per calorie. However, if the salad is the main course of the meal, you're going to need to make sure that you add in starchy root vegetables and perhaps even whole grains, depending on how thin you are or how much weight you don't want to lose, in order to get enough calories. It's important not to try to live simply on leafy green vegetables because they don't have enough calories, although they're wonderfully nutrient dense and great at fighting cancer and lowering your blood pressure. As we consider osteoporosis further, we remember that weight-bearing exercise is a daily component that is needed to help prevent osteoporosis, the weakening of the bones. Sunlight is also a very important part of our life every day so that we can get sunlight on our skin to turn our precursors into vitamin D. It's okay to take vitamin D supplements, but a much, much better way to get your vitamin D is daily sunlight exposure. What about Alzheimer's? What makes it worse? Alzheimer's is a disease where memory is lost to a disabling point. The Alzheimer's epidemic in this country is fueled by a diet rich in animal protein. The more meat, dairy, and eggs that you eat, the higher your risk of dementia, memory loss, and possible eventual Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, in its final stages, is very hard to distinguish from Jakob-Creutzfeldt encephalopathy, which can be caused by mad cow disease. What lowers the risk of dementia or Alzheimer's disease? Eating a low-fat, plant-based diet of whole, natural, unprocessed foods has been proven to preserve brain power, to preserve brain function, cognitive ability, long past the time when many people are in cognitive decline or on their way to Alzheimer's. Eating a low-fat, plant-based diet is the best thing that you can do to protect one of your most favorite, precious assets, your brain power. Lower your risk of Alzheimer's with a low-fat, plant-based diet. What about gluten intolerance? Is it as prevalent as people seem to think? Many people feel better not eating gluten, and yet it seems to be more popular than the amount of actual gluten-intolerant people scientifically tested would warrant. However, if you want to avoid gluten, fine, avoid gluten. But remember that the gluten-free aisle in the store can be filled with low-fiber, highly processed junk. So don't think that something's healthy just because it says gluten-free. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, and the cholesterol-lowering effect of wheat is far less than the protein that's found in lentils, even though both are plant-based proteins. So if you've got a lot of cholesterol to lower, you might be better off avoiding wheat in favor of lentils, even if you don't want to be actually all the way gluten-free. There's another factor about wheat that I'd like to consider, and that is the opiate effect of wheat on the bowel. What's the opiate effect? Opiates are a class of medication that slow down the bowel. They're used for pain medication, and they make the bowel sluggish. So does wheat. Remember, however, that even if the flour is completely gluten-free, what do you get when you mix flour and water? A gooey paste. And that can go through the bowel much more slowly. So even if the flour is gluten-free, if you suffer from constipation, you may be better cutting out flour from all sources, gluten-free or gluten-filled. However, if you suffer from constipation, be sure to avoid wheat, because when you eat wheat, You worsen constipation if that's your issue and you're suffering from it and nothing seems to help. What about joint pains and wheat? Are they associated? Some people feel more joint pain when they eat wheat. So try eliminating wheat from your diet for a month and see if it has any effect on your joints. If you're going to eat wheat, make sure that it's whole grain and in its most unprocessed form as possible. That's why if you're going to eat wheat, I ask that you consider Food for Life sprouted wheat bread, such as the Ezekiel 4:9 bread. It's oil-free, it's sprouted, it's not made into flour, it's a live grain, and live grains have a delicious taste. Plus, they're bursting with nutrients. So if you're going to buy store-bought bread, make sure that it's Food for Life sprouted wheat bread. Gluten intolerance can make some people feel lethargic or listless with a lack of energy when they eat gluten. Some people just feel more energetic when they're not eating gluten. The flour used in whole wheat bread versus the flour used in whole wheat pasta can be a factor in some people's constipation, joint pain, or lack of energy. Because you see, when you have that flour used in bread, which is made with yeast, there are many little air pockets that make the particles much smaller and the nutrients rush into the bloodstream much faster. This can cause more inflammation and a higher rise in blood sugar with a resulting crash. Whereas when you use whole wheat flour to make pasta, it's a much more solid product. There aren't little air-filled pockets because pasta does not involve yeast in the making of the product. And thus, the nutrients enter the bloodstream much more slowly, and you have a better overall effect for your health if you're using whole wheat pasta than if you're using whole wheat bread. Nonetheless, there are wonderful gluten-free pastas such as brown rice pasta, and they're quite healthy, the only ingredients being brown rice flour and water. What about fibromyalgia? Can the low-fat plant-based diet without meat, dairy, eggs, and oil make a difference for those sufferers? Absolutely. I'm here to hold out hope for you if you suffer from fibromyalgia and feel that you've tried everything. Please give it a chance, but it may take 6 months because fibromyalgia is a very difficult condition to reverse. Fibromyalgia is important in not only what we eat, but all of the 8 natural remedies, which include daily fresh air. If you have fibromyalgia, you need an hour of fresh air every day. Exercise. Exercise is key for fibromyalgia patients. Don't overdo it, but do it regularly and make sure that you've got cardiovascular like walking, which is great for endurance exercise that doesn't wear out your joints, as well as light weightlifting, low weights with many reps, and stretching. Stretching is key for fibromyalgia patients. Water. It's very important that fibromyalgia patients drink their 64 ounces of water every day before 5 p.m. between their meals and avoid coffee, tea, soda, and chocolate unless that tea is completely caffeine-free. Rest. Rest is really important for fibromyalgia too. Make sure that you're in bed early enough to be fully asleep by 10 p.m. because 2 hours of sleep before midnight are worth 4 hours of sleep after midnight. Abstinence from harmful things like caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine are very important for the fibromyalgia patient. Nobody feels better when they have fibromyalgia when they use these things long term, although in the short term they may feel the long-term downside of caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, just not worth it. The low-fat plant-based diet, as I said, is key for fibromyalgia patients. Sunshine is also important. And if you have naturally darker skin, you can tolerate more sunshine than the fair-skinned blue-eyed redhead or pale blonde. However, all of us need sunlight every day. It's a very healing part of the natural remedies. And then finally, the 8th natural remedy is trusting in God's love. You see, a dull spirit really does dry the bones, as the good book says. When we consider the powerful connection between the mind and body, we realize that the immune system can be suppressed, the energy can be lowered, and the joints can be made much more achy with musculoskeletal inflammation rising if we have thoughts that are negative, critical, harsh, and untrusting. So, set your mind on things above, as the Bible says, and trust in God's love. Chronic fatigue. The low-fat plant-based diet can make a difference for chronic fatigue patients because the more energy that you need, the more important a low-fat plant-based diet is without meat, dairy, eggs, and oil. Chronic fatigue sufferers have found their conditions dramatically improved, and in some cases reversed, by following the 8 natural remedies: fresh air, exercise, water, rest, abstinence from harmful things like caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, and a diet that's low in fat and completely plant-based with no meat, dairy, eggs, or oil. Golden sunshine and trusting in God's love also help with chronic fatigue syndrome. What about detoxifying the body? Do we need to buy expensive bowel cleanses? No, these have not been scientifically shown to assist health. Cleanse your body by the way you eat every day. Drink your water in between your meals and eat a low-fat, plant-based diet in its whole, unprocessed, natural form, and that's the detoxifying that the body needs. Get the rest and exercise, the sunlight, the fresh air that you need. And that's the best detoxifier regimen that you could follow. Is coconut milk better than coconut oil? Or what about coconut cream? Coconut milk and cream are still pretty high in fat, and I have chosen not to use them because of their effect on inflammation, because of the effect of saturated fat on the liver to produce more cholesterol, and because of the association of saturated fat with cancer risk. Coconut products have more saturated fat than lard. If one asks, is coconut milk better than coconut oil? I ask, is chewing tobacco better than pipe tobacco? What about multivitamins? Are they safe? Are they necessary? I don't feel that the science supports the taking of a multivitamin. The reason for this is that multivitamins contain components which have been shown to increase cancer when taken in pharmaceutical doses. You see, it's much better to get your vitamins in the form of whole, unprocessed, plant-based foods. One of those components has been vitamin E. If you take vitamin E in pharmaceutical doses, there is an associated risk with lung cancer. Then there's the risks with too much vitamin A, and folic acid has been associated with an increased risk for prostate and breast cancer, up to 167% increased risk for those cancers when people are taking pharmaceutical doses of folic acid, such are found in prenatal vitamins. You see, folate is found in green plants. The word comes from foliage, but folic acid is found in pharmaceutical pills. Instead of telling women who are pregnant to take prenatal vitamins, we should be telling women who are pregnant to eat more leafy green vegetables, because most of us don't get as many as are optimal for health. The healthiest people on the planet, as measured by the amount of nitric oxide in their blood, are Okinawans, age 15 to 35. They ate, on the average, 5 servings of leafy green vegetables daily. I've been asked, will going on a plant-based diet take care of all health-related problems? Diet is just one factor in the 8 natural remedies, but diet relates to 80% of the diseases that walk through my door every day. Going on a low-fat plant-based diet is the very healthiest thing that you could do for your diet. However, some health conditions are so deeply entrenched or so long-standing that cures may not be possible. Also, remember, as Jeff Novick tells us, vegan is not enough. It's good to be completely free of animal products in your diet. However, we also need to be as unprocessed as possible and as low in fat as possible by eliminating all oils, which clearly have been associated with disease. What about dry roasted peanuts? Dry roasted peanuts are high in fat and not as healthy for some people as other nuts or for other people who can tolerate that much fat. 80% of their calories come from fat, and many people would do well to avoid peanuts and peanut butter. I've been asked, what about a daily diet of avocados? I love avocados. Can I eat them every day? I wouldn't. They're pretty high in fat, and if you eat that much fat, even if you're not overweight, you may suffer inflammation and adverse health risks down the road. So be moderate with your use of avocado. I wouldn't eat one every day. What about recurring urinary tract infections, also called bladder infections? When we have recurring urinary tract infections, we can find great relief by avoiding dairy completely, specifically avoiding cheese. Cheese is concentrated dairy protein. The whey and the casein are packed together in the cheese. If you took 10 gallons of fluid milk, it would take all 10 gallons with the water removed, and then you would make 1 gallon of cheese. That means that with the water removed, the proteins are far more concentrated. The more concentrated the casein, the greater the risk of inflammation, especially of the bladder lining. And recurring bladder infections have been shown to respond greatly by getting all the dairy out of the diet. Many of my patients have completely cured by avoiding dairy completely. What about caffeine? Does that play a role in recurring urinary tract infections? You bet it does. And if you are suffering from constant bladder burn and constant irritation of your bladder wall or recurring infections, please eliminate caffeine as fast as possible and never go back to it, because caffeine isn't necessary for health or life, and it's been shown to be a factor in interstitial cystitis, the chronic irritation of the lining of the bladder. Be sure to drink your 64 ounces of water daily before 5 p.m., drinking it between your meals so that your bladder can make plenty of urine that is dilute enough to wash out the lining of the bladder and no longer feel so irritated. What about using coconut oil on your skin and in your hair? Yes, I love using coconut oil on my skin and in my hair. I think it smells great, has a lovely feel and texture. I love using coconut oil. I just don't eat it. Foot and ankle swelling. Doctor, what can I do about those? When people ask me this question, I let them know that constipation is a factor in foot and ankle swelling that most people have overlooked. When people are constipated, the food contents are moving very slowly through the bowel, and this slow movement of food contents can act like a tourniquet, causing back pressure on the veins of the foot and leg. You see, the veins of the foot and leg have valves in them. They're supposed to be one-way valves, and those one-way valves open when the muscles of the feet and legs move, and up goes the blood about 1 inch, and then the one-way valve closes so the blood can't run back down. You see, gravity is pulling the blood down to the feet, and the heart is actively pumping it down to the feet. There's no heart in the big toe pumping the blood back up towards the heart. So how does the blood get from the big toe back up against gravity towards the heart? Well, it's muscular action. Many people don't realize that walking briskly can help you avoid foot and ankle swelling. Varicose veins are caused when the one-way valves become incompetent because of so much pressure in the abdomen. That pressure in the abdomen can be caused by tumors, but far more likely is that pressure caused by the low-fiber food in the standard American diet, with its meat, dairy, and eggs, which have no fiber. Neither do oils. All the fiber has been removed from the fat to make the oil. When we eat a diet full of meat, dairy, eggs, and oil, and the food is going through too slowly, we're much more likely to have foot and ankle swelling, even if we don't feel constipated. But when you eat a whole food, unprocessed, plant-based diet, the food contents move through the intestines so briskly that they don't act like a tourniquet, and feet and ankles don't swell. Varicose veins are much less likely. The broken capillaries on the sides of the legs, much less likely. And remember, try not to cross your legs, because when we sit, we compress the big veins at the back of the thigh, and that also can pool the blood down to the ankles. Walk daily, walk briskly. Walking is a great exercise, so keep those legs in great shape with walking. When people ask me what they can do about the suffering they endure from foot and leg cramps, I let them know that footwear is very, very important, and when women are suffering foot and leg cramps, many times high-heeled shoes are to blame because of the unnatural foreshortening of the plantar fascia. This is the soft tissue, the aponeurosis, that is between the skin and the bones on the bottom of the foot. And it can be aching because there's so many nerves in it if we foreshorten that tissue by the use of a high heel shoe. If we do stretches for the feet, that can really help to prevent foot cramps. We need to do stretches for the legs on a daily basis. We need more exercise because many people sit all day in their work, and this promotes foot and leg cramps. What else promotes foot and leg cramps is lack of fresh air and sunshine. Lack of sleep. If we don't sleep before 10 p.m., we don't have what we need to make good blood circulation and carry away the waste products that the cells have built up, and this can promote leg cramps. Caffeine and alcohol are diuretics. They make us urinate away our water. This also can contribute to foot and leg cramps. And then a low-fat plant-based diet can help us avoid foot and leg cramps because it's so anti-inflammatory, especially when you're eating beans, greens, squash, and yams for breakfast, the Starch-Smart way. Thank you for your kind attention during this session of Ask the Doc. For more information, visit my website at www.drcarney.com. And if you'd like social support, recipe sharing, blogs, discussions, then you can visit www.starchsmart.com and become a part of our helpful sharing community. Thanks for joining me today.